Good morning. This is Steve from Southern Illinois again. And I want you to know today, this has been a really rough week for me because this week, this is where I was supposed to have been, Alaska. This is the #1 on my bucket list now that I've been to New Zealand. I just have always dreamed of going to Alaska and seeing the glaciers and grizzly bears and orcas and whales and the aurora borealis. I just I've been in real mourning because Vivian and her family and I were supposed to have gone on this dream vacation, a cruise up the Inside Passage from Vancouver to Alaska, and then COVID came along, and instead here I am in Southern Illinois, drowning in tomatoes and fresh squash from the garden and trying to figure out what to do with okra. But one of the weirdities about Steve is that when he goes on vacation, he starts 6 months before vacation, researching all the places along the way and trying to learn interesting tidbits. Once in New Zealand, I actually took Google Street View and walked the entire route, yard by yard, looking at all the businesses and the points of interest, just to find things to share with Vivian as we were going. So on this trip, you can't use Street View because there are no streets on the Inside Passage. So instead I had to use Google to find communities and islands and things. The Inside Passage stretches from Vancouver, which is right at the corner of the US and Canada, and goes up the coast to Alaska. And the first stage stays on the east side of Vancouver Island, which is this island you see here on the picture. It's a huge island, and it's only separated from the other islands in the archipelago by a narrow strip of water called the Discovery Passage. At most it's only a mile or so wide. And the narrowest part of it, called the Seymour Narrows, is this section here that is only 4/10 of a mile wide, and all of the marine traffic going up the Inside Passage goes through these narrows. Now, that's not much, I drive my car into the garage, and it has a much closer variance than cruise ships going through a narrow area that's a 1/4 of a mile wide. Except that, okay, this is not just a narrow area. Vancouver Island is 290 miles long. So what's the big deal, Steve? Well, that narrow strip of water that separates Vancouver Island on the east side from the other land, that's actually an extension of the sea. That's not a river. And what happens in the ocean? Tides. Now, when you have an island this long, something really strange happens. See, the high tide, now I've used January 1st, 2019 to illustrate. High tide at the north end of the island came at 10:37 p.m. High tide at the south end of the island didn't happen till 5:14 a.m., which means, since high tides come twice a day, that a 6-hour difference in the tides from the north end to the south end of the island means that at the north end of the island when it's high tide, at the south end of the island it's low tide. And so behind the island you have this water sloshing back and forth, high tide running down to low tide down, running down, or and then 6 hours later, low tide on the south end of the island, running to high tide on the south end of the island, running to low tide on the north. Okay, which makes for some really strong currents. Okay. Only the strongest ships can manage these currents of almost 20 miles an hour. But it's even more than just strong currents that ships are having to deal with, because the base of this channel, the Discovery Channel, isn't nice and flat. It's rocky and mountainous, just like the country around it. And here in the Seymour Narrows, right at the mouth of the Seymour Narrows, there used to be a mountain. The bottom here is over 300 feet deep. But this mountain used to come up to within 9 feet of the surface at low tide. And when you have a mountain in the middle of rapid streams, this is what it used to look like. Now, this is a black and white photo from the aerial photo from the 1950s, so it doesn't meet our standards of what a picture should look like. But you have the south head of this mountain, which was called Ripple Rock, and the north head here. And this is ebb tide, so the current is flowing this direction, and you can see all of the turbulence that is happening around Ripple Rock. These currents at 20 miles an hour are whipping back and forth. Sometimes that's a whirlpool. Sometimes it's aiming towards the Vancouver Island side. Sometimes it whips back and aims the other way. Ships going through the Seymour Narrows had a really rough time. In fact, only the fastest and most maneuverable could safely make it through the Narrows, except at slack tide. So that's halfway between high tide and low tide, when the currents were almost completely still. At that time, about 2,000 large ships went through this narrow place per year. About 5,000 small ships went through. And like I said, only the fastest and the most maneuverable could handle the strong currents, so all the rest of the ships had to hang around and wait until slack water came. And slack tide only lasted about 30 minutes. So during that 30 minutes, all of these smaller and clumsier ships had to rush through. Talk about a traffic jam, trying to get through the Narrows before the current picked up again and dashed them to pieces on the rocks. Well, as you can imagine, the shipping industry wanted this problem fixed. Now, originally, the British government, the Canadian government tried to anchor barges over Ripple Rock and drill down in and put charges down there and blow it up. Problem was the currents were so strong that the barges kept breaking loose and getting capsized, and after 3 sailors had died trying to maneuver the barges, they gave up. Engineers came up with a new plan. They tunneled down below the seabed and then put this tunnel up under Ripple Rock, with 2 secondary tunnels going up into the rock and a whole network of other they call them coyote runs, going through the rock. And then they put over 1,200 tons, 1,200 tons of explosives into that rock. And at ebb tide, okay, at low tide, when there was the least amount of water over the rock, they blew it up. Over 700 tons of rock and water went up to 1,500 feet into the sky. And Ripple Rock, which used to come within 9 feet of the surface, all of a sudden was down at 70 feet below the surface. Now today, Ripple Rock has not been a threat for over 60 years. Since they blew up Ripple Rock, not a single ship has been snagged, dragged, holed, drugged down into the depths. Not a single life has been lost. Now you say, Steve, oh, that's kind of cool, but so what? Okay, this happened 1958. Okay, all these cruise ships are going back and forth. Yeah, all those cruise ships are going back and forth. And not a single one of those 5,000 tourists on every one of those ships is even aware that underneath them lie the remnants of Ripple Rock. So, I want to leave you with a question. What's your Ripple Rock today? What snags you, drags you, slashes you about, pushes you off course, hurts you, harms you, derails you, causes you to hurt the people around you? Now, Jesus set a very, very high standard for his followers. He said, be perfect like your Father in heaven. Now, theologians have debated that, and today, most of the time, when they talk about it, they say, see, Jesus was just using hyperbole. Okay, all of this talk about being perfect and how you have to actually, sin actually happens in your heart and in your thoughts. It's not just your behaviors. All of that was just to teach us how impossible it is for us to be perfect and how much we need a Savior. Now, I don't have a problem with needing a Savior, okay? I've been around the block enough times to realize that I can't be all I could be. Or rather, I want to be more than all I can be. Because all Steve can be is far less than what I can dream. Far less than what I want to be in your life or mine. And I keep running into Ripple Rocks in my life that derail me and push me off course. Jesus said, I can do all things, you can do all things with me. What's your Ripple Rock? Now next week I'm going to start unpacking this idea and what it's meant in my life, okay? But I just want to tell you, you don't have to put up with Ripple Rock in your life. Just like the Canadian government blew up this obstacle and removed this danger from the Seymour Narrows, the same thing can happen in your life. Be safe, be prudent, but above all, keep looking up, friends. I'll see you next week. Bye.